Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well, and it's time for another starter pack video where I hit you with a series of recommendations for a bunch of albums and a bunch of artists within a given genre. This time, the subject, goth rock. Yes, we are talking goth rock, and just like the last time we did a video like this, we are embarking on this recommendation series, this entry recommendation series with my good friend Giggins. Each of us picked 3 goth rock representative albums each for you to check out if you're looking to dip your toes into this genre. Information on the records down below in the D box, also the link to Giggins' YouTube channel too. And yeah, that is going to be it. Let's get into the conversation without any further ado. Ba-bam. All right, here we are. As I said, we would be bringing the album covers into the fold onto the screen, and let's get started on these juicy, wonderful, delicious goth rock recommendations. We are going to kick things off with this Siouxsie and the Banshees record. Lots of amazing, game-changing, iconic goth rock figures throughout the history of the genre that we can't cover all of them. But Siouxsie Sioux is one of the biggest and most significant and most impactful of all of them. And obviously, by way of Siouxsie and the Banshees, she made that impact. The Siouxsie and the Banshees discography is long. There are a lot of amazing highlights throughout it. But you decided for your recommendation here that you would go with the debut, The Scream.
Yeah.
What made you go with this record? Why does it stand out to you in the discography? And, also just in the greater kind of, canon of gothic rock?
This one, for me, you hear the hunger in their performances because they were so new at this point. But,
sure,
things would change as their discography went on. Like any band does, they grow as a group. But I kind of like this sort of, it's a little poppy, but very stark and dry production. It's punchy, it's dark, and there's a lot of stiff rhythms that I feel kind of incorporate that gothic sound. But it's also sort of post-punky, post-rocky at the same time. So it's on that fine line of, what is goth, what is post-punk, what is post-rock.
Yeah.
And they balance that well, I think. And Siouxsie Sioux's vocals, go anywhere from really sweet to screaming. And you can hear her sound influencing, Slater Kenny, Carrie Brownstein. Her vocals are completely out of the Siouxsie Sioux canon. But I chose this one because lyrically, it is dark, but there's a lot of, heart to this thing. It can be guttural. There could be guitars that are a little bit more jangly, which I think was a gothic kind of thing. There's some slightly jangly guitars, but a spooky atmosphere. The whole album just sounds bleak, and I really enjoy it. Sort of, like I said before, dry production, but it rocks the whole way through, and it's uniquely original. I feel like they're constructing songs on their own pattern, their own feel, making something that hadn't been done before. So in terms of goth rock, lyrically, yeah, it's got some darker moments, but they also cover Helter Skelter. So they know what's influencing them.
Right.
And doing things their own way. It's a completely original sound. So I think if I was there in 78, this would have been mind blowing to hear for the first time.
No, absolutely. And I like that you brought up kind of one of those last points about, just the general vibe of the album, because I feel like a lot of the appeal and magic and character of goth rock comes up in the ambiance.
Yes.
Is it bringing that dark, eerie, kind of strange, unnerving, uncomfortable
tense
sound that's just, is the album that weird girl standing in the corner, staring everyone down, just making everybody uncomfortable, like she's been looking at us all night, like what is going on?
I feel the daggers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you want to feel the album sort of staring you down and stabbing those daggers into you and just making things a little weird and a little awkward, just harshing the vibe a bit.
A little uncomfortable. Yeah.
So I feel like, no, absolutely, this record most definitely checks those boxes, most certainly. And as you were also kind of saying, that there is almost that quality where is it like goth rock is a little post-punky? It's important to sort of note that there is kind of that transition period before we're fully in goth rock mode, not only just for the genre, but Siouxsie and the Banshees themselves.
Right.
And, it's a lot of that groundwork being laid by bands like Joy Division,
yes.
And then it kind of going on from there, because while Joy Division may not necessarily be technically one of the bands in those genres, like they obviously played really well to that crowd and, went on to influence so many of the bands that went on to define what goth rock was. And, as far as like time period goes, you're not really getting much more in on the ground floor than you are in 1978.
Yeah, it's early.
It's pretty freaking early for the genre, and we're not going to be able to cover every kind of major happening or even like, development or leg within the style of music in this recommendation. I mean, that's why I kind of limited it to gothic rock, because we could have easily gone into like, without that limitation, we could have gone like, gothic country and dark wave
stuff.
and so, yeah, exactly. Exactly. The more club centric stuff too, but we're trying to stick more to a rock lane, but a lot of even that, like starts off here, with early records like this.
Yeah.
So
hell of an album.
if you want like a really early kind of clear defining record in this style, you're not really kind of getting much better than this, other than, kind of the just the blueprint being laid out in front of you.
Yeah.
So, all right,
excellent work.
Next is my pick, and I kind of had, a bit of a similar philosophy with this one, presuming that that's why you went with that record. But I also threw into the mix here the Sky's Gone Out by Bauhaus in 1982. Came out several years later. But as far as like goth rock goes, this is like so boilerplate.
It's awesome.
It's awesome.
It's just so good.
It's so good. I mean, you could probably say their debut is maybe more boilerplate than this to a degree, but I feel like I feel like by this point, a few records in, the band had a more concrete idea of what they were doing. The performances, and especially the vocals, were wilder and more intense. And the band is really just like kind of going all out and just, really leaning into, we're just going to create a rock sound, a rock vibe that's unnerving. Yeah. And again, you really kind of hear like that late 70s post-punk, that Joy Division kind of eerie, spacey ambiance. You have that hollow, like plucking bass. You have the wild, kind of washed out guitars. And again, the vocals are weird and off-putting as fuck. It's all just intense. It's all dark, just like the Siouxsie record that we just talked about. It's really all about the ambiance. Yeah. It's all about the intensity of that darkness. And, it's straightforward. It's no muss, no fuss. It's really about the theatrics and the drama and just very stark, dark, harsh rock instrumentation, which is why, I picked it. I feel like as far as like, essential goth rock blueprints go, like this is pretty much it. And, once again, you're getting a lot of those really clear post-punk influences too. Mm-hmm. Later down the road, as we kind of, discuss goth rock and goth centric artists who, made their way more in the 90s or the 2000s or even more recently than that, you do kind of hear that post-punk influence dropping off. It's obviously dark, it's unnerving, but you're not really kind of getting that super clear Joy Division connection that you would from any artist who was coming out with a record either in the late 70s or the early to mid 80s. But still, like, that kind of DNA creativity tree, starts off with records like this and the Siouxsie record, which again, essential listens if you're trying to get into this genre. Anything else you want to add to this record before we move on to your next pick? I
mean, for as weird as it is, it's also very digestible. Like it's tense and it's weird, and it's got that sort of, again, bleakness to it. But the atmosphere they create is like really fun to dig into. For as off-putting as some of the lyrics might be, but like vocally it ranges anywhere from screaming to really confident, smooth, almost Bowie-esque at times. I mean, they did Ziggy Stardust around that time, but the production I think works really well because you think 80s production, everything has that big boomy drum sound. Yeah, but this works really well because when you have those sort of like sort of jarring guitars, those sort of guitar stabs, and the sort of reverby drums, it creates this otherworldly sound. Like it comes from a different dimension. But Exquisite Corpse is one of my favorites on this album because you have all these different moments of like there's screaming, there's dub, there's tension. I was gonna pick their first album actually, so I'm glad you picked this one because I love this album. Man, it's great.
Okay, cool.
Nailed it.
All right, moving on to The next one, a recommendation that you brought to the table, it's actually going to be from one of my favorite bands. This is actually the first band I ever owned a vinyl record of. I ever bought a vinyl record.
Oh, no way.
It was their live album, Rockin' and Reelin' in Auckland, New Zealand.
Yeah.
The Cramps with Smell of Female. So you went with this early live project from the band that has a handful of tracks on it. That came out, very much at like the front end of their career. What made you go with this over another live record of theirs or a studio album, something like that?
I love this one. The Cramps for me, I'm always having a tough time saying that they're goth because they're not truly goth.
They're goth adjacent.
They're goth adjacent.
They're sort of goth off vibes.
I think they got more goth as they went on. Like their lyrics became more like "this is Halloween" kind of stuff. But
I don't know. Like early on, like they were singing about monsters and
that's true,
stuff like that.
That's true.
To me, as far as like goth goes, they're like camp. They're
okay.
They're like the leg of the genre that's high camp. We're talking about monsters,
sci-fi movies,
literal sort of like darkness and devils and scary women, and scary, dark, threatening ladies.
I feel like musically they don't sound like a lot of other goth bands at that time. Like
it's true, but if you looked at them.
If you
looked at them side by side,
yes,
with any other goth band, you're like, that's a goth band,
and probably one of the best band logos of all time. Like it's the coolest looking logo,
absolutely.
But I think if you were into other goth groups, you would have loved the Cramps as well. But they definitely take their influences from the '50s, definitely that rockabilly guitar feel,
rockabilly, garage rock, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
I mean, this is but there's still like classic goth rock bands and records of that era, there's still like that spaciness.
Yeah.
There's still that chaos.
Sure.
There's still that noise. There's also like, another thing that's worth discussing is like the parallels between a lot of goth rock early on and later and psychedelic music.
Yes.
And the Cramps most definitely embrace psychedelia.
They were fans. Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, no, I picked this one because it's live, and a lot of these songs were new for that record at the time. And you hear the energy in their performances; they're feeding off the audience. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. But I think live albums give a good sense of like what the scene was like. It kind of contextualizes going to the show and being a part of the scene at that time. So, especially with goth rock, I mean, at that time it was fairly new. So it's kind of cool to see a genre emerging and having these weird people find each other and enjoy this music together. But I mean, the album for me is just like, it's raw, it's rocking. I love Lux's vocals. The dude was crazy. For me, I think it's a really cool representation of what goth can also be. It's not just like atmosphere that's super heavy and dark, but they can have fun.
I feel like if this record is proof of anything, it's that gothic music, gothic rock, gothic whatever, it doesn't necessarily have to adhere to a really strict aesthetic criteria.
Sure.
Like you can qualify as a gothic band like based on vibes.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter if you've got those kind of like really washed out, strung out guitars or foreboding vocals or even that really direct post-punk influence or anything. Like as long as you're kind of bringing something that's unnerving and unsettling to the table and making some kind of like broad representation of darkness through whatever means that you're doing that. And I feel like the Cramps achieved that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, again, just something like weird, something unsettling. And there are other ways in which I feel like the band, like I was saying earlier, qualifies with like, those allusions to creepiness and eeriness and monsters and, 1950s cinema culture and so on and so forth. Also like fantastically horny band, like one of the horniest bands of all time.
Like, holy crap.
Which I feel like that also kind of like, ties into it a little bit. There is like a history of goth rock and goth music that, ties into weird carnal alternative forms and explorations of sexuality. And the Cramps most definitely represent that too in their work.
Head first.
So, good and interesting pick. And, most certainly goth in my eyes without any doubt whatsoever, even if it doesn't sound like a frickin' Cure record.
Well, that's the thing. You think goth, you think just sad, lonely lyrics, and here they are talking about monsters from outer space.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's the weird part. People are like, are they really goth? But yeah, I'd say they are.
Yeah. All right. Next in the list, one that I picked was Nick Cave's Let Love In. 1994 record. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, actually. I don't want to forget the and the Bad Seeds, as there are Nick Cave albums and there are Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds albums. And I went with this one because I feel like, this is like a representation of the genre in the 90s where things like really started to get, 90s and late 80s, when things really started to get very theatrical.
Yeah.
It's like you have artists who are like really embracing more refined instrumentation, almost like cinematic instrumentation. Like, this is very clearly a rock album from front to back. But, when you're looking at tracks like the opener, Red Right Hand, which I mean has been used in, I believe, at least a few movie soundtracks. Like, there's a real cinematic, dramatic, eeriness there. There's an eeriness there. And also on top of it, like, Nick Cave, one of a kind, once in a lifetime vocalist and,
For sure.
Singer whose, voice just like, when he's singing about the devil, you feel it.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't with any other artist doing that.
He knows that guy.
Yeah. Like he's buds with that dude.
Like, they've had coffee before. Yeah. It wasn't fun.
He's singing from a place of like knowing that guy personally, and it's he's speaking about the devil from a place of authority. So I mean, there's again, it's like we're not talking about the chaos and the punk intensity of a lot of those early gothic rock works that were essential for laying the groundwork, but instead later down the road, years later, embracing still that darkness, still those unsettling vibes. And really amplifying the eeriness in a way that was purely theatrical with some great lyrics as well. I mean, Nick Cave,
sure.
Underrated, I think, as far as like a storyteller goes on the songwriting front. And I understand why, because his voice and the production that goes into his records, just the general catchiness of his songs too, are so incredible. It's sometimes easy to overlook how good the lyrics are and can be, but, still fantastic, still incredible. So yeah, I mean, I feel like, as far as songwriting, as far as production, as far as, general vibe, this was kind of, essential as well. And out of all the records that I feel like we've listed today, in my opinion, I mean, I think it probably depends on the person, but I think one of the most easily digestible too. I feel like there are people who may not be that into punk or post-punk or rock that is chaotic, but can find something in what Nick Cave does because it is like so cleanly and colorfully produced. It does sound like you're listening to a movie at some points, which I feel like is something that, maybe a broader, swath of music listeners could get into and appreciate, as opposed to something that's like, more alternative and unnerving like Bauhaus.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, I definitely get that cinematic quality from this album as well, but I think you take the elements of what made Goth, and then it's almost like if that was the stage play, this is the movie. So like it's been Hollywoodized, but I use that term loosely. I don't know. There's a impassioned sadness to Nick's vocal delivery that's really good on the ears. That sets him apart from anybody else. But I also feel like there's a maturity in his delivery and in the lyrics that's sort of like has a wisdom to what's happening. So kind of going off what you said of like, knowing the devil, like you believe what he's singing. He could sing about like baking the best bread he's ever had. And you'd be like, hell yeah, man, I get it. Like I'm crying in that bread with you. And for as many times as this album does go crashing along and have a rockin' time, there's so many beautiful moments that sort of offset that. So you're on kind of a roller coaster of feelings with this record.
So he was like 36 when this album came out.
Was he really?
Yeah, 36. Wow. Which I mean, tracks with that maturity that you're talking about.
That's
because I mean, if you get into this guy's work, like, and you go back and you go way back, you're talking about like, him being in The Birthday Party, that like infamous, chaotic, almost like. And I love this genre for the most part, but I would say like almost categorically like unlistenable noise rock band.
I almost put one of their albums on here, actually. Yeah,
I feel like as far as noise rock, there is an element of noise rock that you could say that, its quality level can almost be judged by how difficult it is to listen to. And The Birthday Party is definitely like one of those top bands in that genre that are really fucking hard to listen to.
Take your time with them.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting to think of him, obviously, being in that band and being at that point in his career, and eventually, like, down the road, developing into this, into something that is so poised and is so focused and is so refined and methodically assembled.
Yeah,
like, going from that point of like pure, drug fueled insanity and chaos to something just more dramatic and sad and forlorn, such as this, definitely, like, again, speaks to the range of someone like Nick Cave, but also just the range of kind of this vibe, this aesthetic, this genre, this scene, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Do a lot with it.
And still him being able to appeal to much that same crowd, in like a different way, without being perceived as somebody, oh, he sold out, or he kind of gave up this, or he gave up that, or whatever.
Yeah.
Still being appreciated artistically in his own right, while going for an entirely different sound. And from there to here is just one of many sections of evolution across the entirety of his career, because he has really had one of the longest and most successful and most interesting, most diverse and well-evolved careers in all of, popular and underground music, unquestionably.
Yeah.
Really up there with Bowie, Prince, anybody that you want to name. And he's still at it, like, literally now, coming out with, new records. I believe he even has one, Wild God, on the way, which, the singles so far have sounded good. So
it's crazy.
All right. Next, we have a couple more recommendations left. This one is from you. I feel like having a Cure record in the mix was going to happen.
Yeah.
That was kind of a necessity. I feel like as far as goth rock goes, they're kind of one of those go-to bands. But, kind of the interesting thing about picking any Cure record for a recommendation list such as this is that they too have such a crazy and wild and diverse discography that, multiple points of it, you could say, influence different legs of the goth genre. The sort of impact that a record like this, had for its time is totally different than what you could say a record like Pornography had.
Or Disintegration years later.
Absolutely. So it's like there are albums on the Cure spectrum that are just impeccably dark and tortured and overwhelming and unforgiving, and there are records in their discography that are light and whimsical and happy and cheery and sweet on the ears, and again, with them still like being considered an essential band within that goth canon, like they're really like pushing the boundaries of what a band in that genre could even be considered doing, because they've written some of the biggest pop hits of all time.
Friday I'm in Love's a massive pop song. It's on normal radio.
Exactly.
But you won't hear this one on normal radio.
No, exactly. So, what made you go with 17 Seconds, which is not even considered one of the most popular records. It's for many, it's maybe not even a top 3 Cure record, but you went with this one. What kind of drew you to this?
This would probably be in my top 5 for the Cure if I was doing a rating list. Mm-hmm. This one looks like how the cover looks.
Yeah.
It's just miserable.
Right. It's very bleak. It's very washed out. You're sort of looking at it like, what is this even an image?
Yeah, I don't know what the hell's a picture of, but like it just sounds like depression. Like every single lyric on this thing is sad and love lost and lonely and confused. Every song is searching for something. And I feel like the cover represents that completely. But Robert sounds like he's on the verge of tears the entire time, which is something he would use on and off throughout his career. But this one in particular, the whole record is stark. Like the drums are unsympathetic and robotic. The guitars stab at you the whole time. There are nice little jangly moments of piano here and there, which I feel like gives it like a little bit of life. But overall, it just sounds like the dead of winter. It just sounds like the most unhappiest birthday party you've ever gone to. It's really off-putting, and I feel like if you've never gotten into The Cure before, I wouldn't start with this album at all.
Yeah, it's not the easiest listen.
No, it's not a digestible sort of album at first, but
again, I feel like the point we're recommending some unnerving records.
If this is one, this is totally one of them. There's a song called "A Forest" on here, which is just like, it's probably one of my favorite Cure songs. It's just really, really weird, but like, it's like just got a couple of moments where like you feel they're going to develop into something else only a couple albums later. Well, like Head on the Door, which is like a complete departure from what this thing sounds like. But At Night is a great song on here, super sad lyrics. But overall, for me, when I think of goth, this is as bleak can get. Yeah, not their most well-known album, but one I would check out for sure. If you want to hear something very different, sit down with this one. It's not good for driving too, but sit down with it.
No, for sure. And, also, again, I feel like it's important to highlight any record that, embraces more that kind of bleak vibe, because I think that's like kind of essential to the greater, kind of like goth tree of
Aesthetic.
essential artists and aesthetics and albums and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Even if this album isn't as easily digestible as some later records in the band's discography, or even their first comparatively, which is, more of
that's a very post-punky.
Yeah, post-punky, pub rocky kind of an album.
I mean, this album for me is also like one of those albums. Like, you remember the goth kids on South Park? Like, I feel like this is the album they would enjoy the most. Like, it's one of those things.
Yeah. And, I feel like this record also kind of like, puts Robert Smith in that position of like, he's the original emo boy.
Yeah.
The OG emo boy.
And it's I think his his juxtaposition on this album is cool because like he adds the human element. I feel like the rest of this album is so sterile sounding. He adds like the human element,
right?
And it's just painful. Yeah, that's all I got.
All right,
Love it.
Last one that I'm throwing into the mix here that I think represents some newness, some recency. Though this record came out in 2015, and she just dropped an album this year, which is also fantastic. Though that album is maybe a bit more electronic, a little more trip hop influenced, which is why I went with this one. It is the 2015 record from Siouxsie Wolfe, Abyss, which I don't know if there are too many artists. I mean, they're out there. Obviously, goth rock and goth everything is like alive and well. But as far as like artists who came out in the last like 10 to 15 years, there are a few out there that to me are as consistently interesting and kind of like have the kind of cultural draw that Siouxsie Wolfe does.
Well said.
So as far as like it's hard to say new blood at this point because she's like, with a career that's, still going very strong, 10 plus years, she feels at least in internet years, like a vet at this point. Which again, is very kind of weird to think. But if you go through Chelsea's entire catalog, like, she really does run the gamut from electronic darkwave stuff to kind of that spacey, weird, unsettling, post-punky goth rock stuff, more classic stuff, gothic folk, and, more ballads, maybe slightly, with a kind of country twang. And records like this, I think, represent more of an ethereal wave and almost like, metal-centric side of the genre, because obviously, we didn't really spend a whole lot of time going into any gothic industrial stuff or any sort of like, obviously the more metal adjacent sides of the genre, of which there are many.
It gets heavy.
Like you could really do a video just on that.
Yeah.
But I mean, out of all the records that have been recommended in this video, this is handily the heaviest. The very slow, just oppressive, crushing doom metal guitars all over all these tracks are just heavy as hell. They're killer. They just all sound like an avalanche. And, but what like kind of makes it all work is that the riffs and grooves are so good. And on top of it, like Chelsea's eerie, strange, beckoning vocals, which are gorgeous, add like a bit of sweetness to that harshness and that bitterness.
Yeah.
That, sort of like the Cure record that you were just talking about. It sort of like breathes a bit of life into it. It's not all just this heavy, crushing, bleak thing. There is kind of like a whimsy and a beauty, and I guess in a way like a romance about it that kind of gets cut, laced into the whole vibe with these with her vocals. Again, if you enjoy this record, I feel like she's kind of doing that once again on this new record that she did, though it's not as metal centric. It's also just as heavy and more industrial, I think in terms of influence. But once again, like it's her vocals that like kind of cut through all that mayhem and that thickness and that heaviness and, sort of like, bring a sweetness to all of it. But, just like kind of a different recipe, I suppose. But, if you're looking for something that, again, is crushing, is heavy, is eerie, and again, with those beckoning vocals, like this is just an incredible representation of the sound, of the genre, of the ways in which it's evolved since its inception in the late 70s. And again, just like kind of mixing in a bit of those metal influences and guitars for something that is a bit more, just aggression. It's got more oomph to it.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I would add, like, for as heavy as this thing is, there's a lot of like sonic textures that she plays with, and she creates a lot of landscapes. So for as adventurous as it is, it also comes back once in a while with some acoustic guitars, which brings like a nice little change of pace. But
yeah, it's dynamic.
It's dynamic for sure. But she's really good at creating swirling, swelling moments, especially on like Survive. Like that thing cranks. It just blossoms and blooms into this like cacophony of just epicness. But yeah, you mentioned a good point about her voice being sweet sometimes, and I like that element because like the bottom end of this record is so earth crushingly heavy, and when you have her on top, kind of lilting sometimes vocally, it's a nice dynamic. So yeah, if you ever heard this one, I'd recommend this one to start her career with. If you're jumping into Siouxsie Wolfe's discography, would you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're already familiar with and into metal.
Yeah.
Like most definitely start with this record.
Yeah.
This is a great songs, great production. If you're somebody who's drawn to that genre generally, this is this is an amazing starting point. If you're more of like an old school goth kind of head and you want something that's like less crushing, more spacey, maybe a bit more electronic, I would say listen to Pain is Beauty instead. There's way more like sequence beats on that sort of thing, more electronics. And I've been impressed with her since her 2011 record, Apocalypsis. That was like the first time I reviewed any of her stuff.
Day one.
Yeah. I know she had some stuff that came out before that, and I'm not even sure. I'm pretty sure I did a video review of that. I'm sort of like losing track of like the very early reviews that I did, some of which were text, and then I eventually transitioned over to just kind of doing only video. And I'm pretty sure there's got to be a review on the channel for that record, and I've been reviewing her consistently since. Again, if you're looking for something that has more breathing room, I would go for one of those two records, or even Birth of Violence. But outside of that, a lot of her catalog is pretty heavy. Especially again this latest LP too.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are the 6 recommendations we want to hit you guys with to get you into goth rock and goth centric stuff from 2 fucking of the whitest nerds that you've seen in your entire life. Anything else to add before we go?
Maybe don't listen to all these in the same day.
Yeah.
Break it up.
Take breaks.
Yeah, do one a day.
Yeah, do one a day.
Put something happy on afterwards.
Microdose it. Yeah. You're the best. Thank you for watching. Feel free to let the class know in the comments what other albums and artists you would recommend in this genre highly. And appreciate you coming through. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or a link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Goth Rock, forever.